You're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello, you're listening to episode 43 of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Using my results driven philosophy of strategy, leadership, teams, and customer experiences, I help organizations develop their best kept secret, their human capital. This podcast is designed to expand the conversation with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development, and what it really takes to create, develop, and maintain results-driven and high-performing organizations. Our guest today is Maceo Owens, visionary, founder, ERG Innovator, and Champion of Inclusivity. Maceo Owens isn't just a professional, she's a driving force behind the evolution of employee resource groups, also known as ERGs. As the founder, CEO, and ERG Program Developer for the ERG Movement, Maceo has become a trailblazer in the realm of workplace inclusivity. With an unwavering passion for diversity, inclusion, and fostering a sense of belonging, Maceo has emerged as a leading expert in the dynamic world of ERGs. And what truly sets her apart is her exceptional ability to not only develop ERGs, but to transform them into potent platforms for change, y'all. You're in for a treat, I promise you. Her innovative strategies have redefined ERGs. If you've not heard of ERGs, you're going to learn everything and then some about ERGs today. So her strategies have transformed and redefined ERGs, turning them into powerful catalysts for progress and industry-wide transformation. Drawing from her corporate experience at DoorDash, KAYAK, and OpenTable, Maceo has redefined and continues to redefine the workplace landscape. She has cultivated environments where employees united by shared backgrounds such as race, parental status, religion, gender. They all come together to create impactful affinity groups. Under her guidance, ERGs cease to be mere organizational entities. They transform into vibrant, dynamic families that foster innovation, understanding, and acceptance. Don't we all want that in our workplace? In every sense, Maceo Owens, aka the ERG homegirl, is not just a professional. She's a visionary leader. With Maceo at the helm, ERGs evolve into more than workplace initiatives. They become vital communities. I think I already told y'all that, So without further ado, let's talk ERGs. Maceo, welcome to RDO.
Thanks for having me. Oh my goodness, that introduction was amazing. I might use it one day, but yeah.
I'll send it to you. I will send it to you. My team, I pull information and I'm like, here, put this together.
I love it.
So I will definitely share it with you. I'm excited to share you with the RDO community because I loved learning from you at the Panoramic Experience. And I love ERGs and I find them extremely valuable. But what I learned from you is if they're done well. So let's set the foundation for those who may not be aware of ERGs, because there's some people that are not. Mm-hmm. What are they? What purpose do they serve? Are there some things that ERGs do and don't do? So just go ahead and lay the foundation for us.
Yep. So to give some context on ERGs, they have been around for over 50 years. So this is not something that's brand new to the world, but they're employee communities. When they first launched, it was the Black ERG at Xerox. It was called the Black Employee Caucus, and it was just Black employees coming together because things were happening in the world, and really they just wanted a community at work. 50 years plus later, ERGs exist at thousands of companies where there will be these communities of inclusion, essentially. So, like you mentioned in the intro, people with some sort of shared background, aka like also shared experience. I also like to add in there like a shared pain point as well. I think that that's
Yes.
something more recently I've begun saying. Um, just to kind of differentiate these from like a social club, like a golf club or something. Really, there's so much depth that comes into that shared pain point too. But anyway, but when you have that community, honestly, people, it's in our DNA to seek people that we feel comfortable around and seek community. So many times, I mean, I've been an employee somewhere where I felt like I didn't belong. I didn't have other people who got me. So ERGs are these volunteer-led communities. People will volunteer in the company and say, I'm open to leading one of these communities. And typically, again, they're communities for learning, for connecting, networking, personal growth and development. There's so many things that they can do, but in general, that's kind of what they are.
So how do they benefit the workplace, right? So if I'm an unevolved leader, right? I never heard of ERGs. I think, why can't y'all just do that on your lunch break? It's taken away from productivity. How do they benefit the workplace?
There is so much power in people actually loving the place that they work at. And
Yeah.
I don't think that that can be like understated. And maybe that's something I personally even want to do more research on so I can come to these conversations with like, here's the data that supports that, but real reliable data in this space is really hard to find. But in general, even speaking from my own experience, there's this excitement that you get like when you start a new company, like I'm starting
Yeah.
fresh. Eventually, if you don't have something beyond the fact that it's a fresh start to hold you to that company, it's not gonna you're not gonna want to stay there long term. Eventually you're gonna be like, actually, this manager isn't what they're not what I thought they were. Or
Mhm.
I'm hearing people who are getting paid more for the same role. If you truly love the company that you're at, though, you're willing to overlook so many of the negatives and the downsides because you want to stay there.
Yeah.
That being said, with employee resource groups, this is another thing. And granted, companies should have other things that they're investing in to help employees to love the company. But this is just another thing to help people to be connected to the company that they're in. Especially what I like to say is that employee resource groups, they meet kind of at the intersection of learning and development. So that professional development piece. Employee engagement. So how are we keeping employees engaged and loving the company? And then diversity and inclusion as well, in terms of you get to learn about other people, cultural competency, all those things there. So that being said, when you put it all together, um, especially from the employee engagement lens, where most employee engagement efforts are pretty generalized, which oftentimes, like just to say it straight, means like it's for like white people, in the workplace. There's not like a diverse slate of like engaging employees oftentimes. There's not going to be the cultural foods, that people kind of want to come in to work and experience, or the fun experiences that in general might, and from an employee engagement perspective, it might be like we don't want to leave a specific group out, so we're just going to do something easy for everyone. Oftentimes it's not even for everyone, but they're trying. I'm not faulting them. ERGs are just a way to help to personalize people's experience in the workplace. So
Right.
there's probably not inherently going to be every single month some employee engagement effort around the LGBTQ community.
Right.
But through an ERG, now there can be at least once a month a touch point for people from that community to connect with each other, to learn, and all these things. So it's for me, ERGs are really about personalizing people's workplace experience to connect them back to their jobs. All again, going full circle. The thought is that when you're connected and you love your job, not only is the concept that you would probably want to stay longer, but also you're probably gonna work harder for a job that you love. So that was a
Mm.
long answer. Yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. When we have a shared pain point, we can come together and not just complain, but we can learn together, we can engage together, all under the umbrella of diversity and inclusion, and then we have connection, which equals retention. I mean, that's my takeaway. That's my takeaway. I love it. I love it. So you have been instrumental in transforming ERGs into powerful catalysts, industry-wide transformation that you have done single-handedly. Could you share can you share some examples of where an ERG initiative under your guidance resulted in positive change in the workplace?
That is such a great question.
Like,
Okay.
what type of strategies did you employ? Overall, what overall change, right? What was the value add of that initiative? Because I know leaders are going to want to know that. They're going to want to be able to say, yes, we have ERGs in our organization. And as we just discussed, the value that it brings for the participant, but how does it create a positive, what does that feel in the workplace?
Yep, there are two examples that I'll give. One is more so on a ERG program level, and then one
Yeah.
is a specific initiative that came from a program.
Okay.
So one company that I worked with, like most companies, their ERG program was a mess in that there was no like role structure in terms like people are volunteering, but what are they volunteering for?
Okay, so let me stop you right here. So
Mhm.
you mean there should be a structure to an ERG?
Definitely. The
Okay,
fact
so
that,
start there. Start there. Tell us about
okay,
that.
I will
You mean
rewind
we're
a
not
little.
just coming together for potluck and complaining and learning? There's a structure to this. There's a formula.
Yes, and that, yeah, we can rewind to that piece because that is huge. And honestly, that's why I do the work that I do,
Okay.
because a lot of companies they went into ERGs just thinking, let's just let employees like you just said, come together and do their thing, which is incredibly irresponsible. And you'll know that that's that type of company. If you hear them use the term like it's a grassroots effort, that means
Mm,
we're just letting them come together and they're going to determine what they do and how they do it. We're even going to give them some money, and they can figure everything else out, which again, from a it's very irresponsible, the thought of giving people who are already really passionate about their community
yeah.
money and full autonomy to do whatever, however, without any guidance at all. And it seems like it's a basic thing to say, no, we will put some structure into it, but because of oftentimes ERGs, how do I want to say, especially during 2020, it was
Mm-hmm.
rushed to launch. So it was just like, we just need community. So I do give kudos to those companies for at least doing something and providing space for employees. But how that could have been executed, it could have been so much more thoughtful, even for companies who had them before 2020. But that being said, yes, ERG leaders, an illustration I've been using recently is if you went to go volunteer at a homeless shelter,
Mm-hmm.
you would go there and you would expect to know exactly what you're going to be doing. They're going to say, "Hey, you're going to be on dishes and we expect you to like do this many and this is how you do it." You wouldn't just be like thrown into there and say like, "Okay, you're volunteering, go volunteer." Like what does that mean? It's the same thing with ERGs. There should be roles, like things that you know that each person who volunteers will be doing. And it should be made super simple for them. Just like with the volunteer, they shouldn't
Right.
be figuring out how to do X, Y, and Z. You should already have it baked out. So it's easy for them to just show up and do the work. So, like, this is so basic, but it doesn't exist at so many companies.
Because we
Um,
don't know what we don't know, right?
exactly.
You
Yeah,
know, you're at an event, you hear ERGs. Wow, this sounds like something we need to do. Hey, now Barbara, you're in charge of the ERGs, and it's like, okay, well, what are we supposed to do? So,
yep,
and it sounds like when there's no structure, that results in further disconnection from the organization.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And wow, my thought just kind of went out of my head, but it came to me when you just said we don't know what we don't know. Oh, to be fair, there has not been a lot of good ERG education out there.
Ah.
And that was one of my problems when I became a full-time ERG program manager. is I was looking for resources and I was just like, none of this stuff is good. None of it makes sense. I mean, there's a couple of people who I definitely will shout out in the ERG space, like Farzana Nayani. I'm a huge fan of hers. She has a book on ERGs, and that's one of the few that I actually do recommend to people. But with that, there's still not enough information out there in the space. And there's a lot of information, but it's not good information because it's just in so many ways. I can rant about that all day, but there's so much bad information about ERGs that's out there. So
Wow.
I don't fault people for getting it wrong or thinking like, oh, we can do it the easy way and it'll be okay. And we'll just use this one template off of this one site from these people who never ran an ERG program. It's just, I get it. But that's again why I do the work that I do. And I want to add too, because I don't really talk about it much when I do podcasts and things like that. But my background, I have it's a very extensive background, which is so funny. It really comes from doing this work. But
Yeah.
even let me reframe that. I have a strong like entrepreneurial background. I've always been like an entrepreneur at heart. So for years before I even got into ERGs, I was into like, what does it actually look like to start a business, to run a business? And like, this is the things that like, I really nerd out about this. Like my friends will come over and I'll be watching business podcasts and they're like, this is what we're doing. And I'm like, yeah, this is what we're doing. So that is why I have like a different lens on this than a lot of
Yeah.
people. And that's kind of where I get this from. Is because I'm actually taking those principles in terms of business development and running and sustaining a real business and applying those to ERGs and treating an ERG like it's its own little business. So
That it's so powerful, Maceo, because and we call that entrepreneurship, right? So here it is, you're taking the entrepreneurship principles and the foundations, and when you apply them to the workforce, you're using it's called being an entrepreneur, because it's very valuable, right? There are lessons as business owners that can definitely be applied in the workplace. So I love that. So circling back to the original question, share some examples of an ERG initiative under your guidance that led to a significant change within the workforce. Now that we've laid that foundation.
yes, okay. Now that we're all on the same page with that. So going into the company that I was working with, their ERG program, like many of them, was a mess. So the initiative, I'll say, is just relaunching the program. Like that's such a heavy one. I don't even think we have time to get into all of it, but just know that relaunching it makes a huge difference. And the members of the program know when the program's a mess. And I say this a lot, but a messy program is like you're giving people a reason to not participate. Because now when they're telling their manager, like, oh, I'm gonna go join this thing, and they're like, that's not a real thing because it doesn't have a program feel to it.
Right.
It just has that it was something that was thrown together. Everything's inconsistent about it. Like it's not real. So, and even then, like that thought process goes through even people's mind on an individual level. Like, am I gonna take time out to participate in this? They don't seem like they're taking it that seriously, so I'm not really gonna do it either. So there's a heaviness to that, but a specific initiative that came with relaunching the program, if I had to give one, I would say probably implementing data to the ERG program. And the reason why that one's so heavy is because a lot of programs are operating without any real data, especially data that they can make like strategic decisions with. So
Yes.
them actually seeing like what who are our members and what do our members want? That those are two basic questions that most ERGs don't know the answer to. But by them seeing that, and who are not our members as well. That's another important question. But that can actually help ERG leaders to make strategic decisions. So not just operating off of what they think is best for the ERG, but working off of data. So
Yeah.
engagement skyrocketed with having that, where we went from 28% of the organization having engaged in an ERG to 50%, over 50% in less than a year. So it's amazing what you can do when you have data, which is, I don't know. I'm not going to say that. But anyway, it's amazing what you can do when you have data.
I agree. I agree. I'm a data geek myself. And so many decisions are made. And I'm the one that will say, what does the data say? What does the data say? I know people are like, if she says that one more time, but if you're not giving people what they want and you're just giving me what you want me to have, then of course I'm not going to be engaged in it.
Yep, exactly. It sounds so obvious, but it is a simple truth. But the data, getting the data, it takes, I'm not even going to say a lot of work, because at least through the work I'm doing with the ERG movement, I'm trying to simplify it for people. But historically, again, without any guidance, most people are like, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to connect the data. I don't know how to do any of that.
Right.
So it has never been a thing. So that's the organization initiative on like a super, I'm not gonna say micro level, like micro, but I guess kind of ERG specific initiative. Yeah. I will point to back in 2020 when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening. I was an ERG leader at DoorDash, a big tech company, in case you all aren't familiar with it. And I was at the time, I was the co-chair of the Black ERG. In that time, it was already it was just a tough time in general with COVID and things like that. But obviously, like being a Black person and kind of like having feelings coming up in the workplace and kind of wanting to take a break and all these things. The fact that we were able to like facilitate decompression sessions is what it was called. Shout out to Morgan Berry, because she came up with that whole concept where she was just like, look, a lot is going on. Do y'all just want to come together and like just decompress? And it started off as like a really informal initiative, or it was maybe like 10 people who joined the call, and it was just like venting and talking. And by the third one, which eventually I ended up like leading them, which is that was interesting because I'm like, I have no professional background in leading this where people are getting like emotional and crying, and but it was just that impactful though. That's what I say it up, where at the time people needed this space, and a lot of people, they didn't have, especially in COVID, they didn't have like friend groups to really vent to and like come together and talk to about this. And at the like you're spending so much time with people at work anyway, it's nice to be able to connect on that level and to have those kind of conversations.
Yeah.
So to really be part of that and part of like really helping people to decompress in such a high stress time like that. And even having allies join the call and like listening, and you can tell like this was like a changing moment to them of like, oh, this is not that this experience is like more intense than I thought it was. Like seeing those transformations was like, it was very, very fulfilling. So, and this happens across communities because things are happening all over the world all the time. So there's always a need to decompress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. From shootings to all kinds of things, right? If you have every community, every shared pain point, you have them in your workplace. You know, you have people of color, you have the LGBTQ, you have religion and or non-religious people, you have parents, you have single people, you have people in your organization who share a pain point or share a feeling of disconnect, if you will, sometimes. And so to be able to come and share and vent and get feedback, that's professional and personal development. I always say personal professional development, they share the same bed, right? If you grow personally, it's going to help you professionally. If you grow professionally, it should help you personally. And to me, it sounds like that's what ERGs do. I'm giving you your medicine right here in the workplace. I'm giving you an opportunity to participate in this group. You mentioned allies. How has that's been the word, I've been hearing, allies, how is the inclusion of allies and advocates, within ERGs affect the dynamics of an ERG? And I guess, here we go. We're doing a lot of teaching in this episode. What's an ally? What's an advocate? And how do they affect the dynamics of an ERG?
Yes, yeah. Okay. So with allies, when we think of allies, just think of someone who's not part of the like who doesn't identify as part of the community, but they still join the ERG. So for instance, for a Black ERG, anyone who's not Black, not from the African diaspora, would be an ally to the community. Yes. So just with any ERG community, and I'll say like about 10 legitimate ERG communities.
Okay.
But even then, with each of those 10, think about the group of people who is not one of those people, but they support those people. That's essentially the concept within ally.
Okay.
The thing is with allyship is that, especially when it comes to ERGs, is that most allies, they go into these groups and again, they want to support, but they don't know how. So their supporting looks like them just becoming a member or joining a Slack channel. And that's the extent of it. Because again, they don't know what else to do from here. They don't know how to show up as an ally. And that is where, and I'll get to this in a second, but that's where the tension between ERG leaders and allies come up, is that ERG leaders haven't given allies a way to show up in their ERG. They haven't actually spelled that out. So most of the time, because they haven't spelled that out, and they say, actually, we kind of want this ERG to be a safe space with just this community. That's actually illegal. So don't do that. Don't bid people to join your community just because they don't identify.
Right.
They have to show up. So now again, you have to show them or tell them how to show up. When I say that, and I just actually spoke at a company last week and I had an ERG leader say, like, honestly, this sounds like we are, and this is like a D&I term that I hear a lot and it irks me, but I think it is saying we're putting the onus on identifying members on these underrepresented communities to educate allies when that's something that they can do in their own time. And that's the typical feedback that I get whenever I tell people, ERG leaders, you have to tell allies how to show up in your community.
Yes.
My response, yeah, my response to that whenever I hear that though is two things. Yes, people can search on Google and they probably, if they showed up in your ERG, they probably do care about this community and they want to learn more, especially as it relates to this community in this workplace. And that's not something that you're going to find on Google. So really spelling it out, like in this workplace, based on how we work. So are we virtual? Are we hybrid? Like, what does it actually look like to show up for this community, to speak up for this community? What does that look like? And what does it not look like? What are some terms and phrases that you should probably be aware of? Again, to not use things like that. Again, might be on Google, but it doesn't have the organizational context. And another piece of that is members join ERGs for different reasons. Some members, identifying members. So me as a Black employee, I might have joined this Black ERG because I feel like we have some work to do with educating the allies at this company. So actually me being part of this process of educating allies is something that's me getting my goal fulfilled. Back to what we first said, an ERG that's successful is fulfilling the goals of its members. So my goal is to, hey, I want to make this place more inclusive for Black employees by making sure allies know their place and know their lines and like what to say and what not to say. I feel fulfilled. So actually getting your membership involved in this can be a huge game changer for your ERG. Yeah. And even then, just spelling it out very simply. There's so much information on Google, but how do you make it very simple, giving people a couple of action items to do as they join this community? So for like an LGBTQ ERG, oftentimes showing up as an ally, an immediate step is to add your pronouns in whatever space you're in. So whether it's in Zoom, Slack, whatever else you use, Workday, whatever it might be, but adding your pronouns, that might be an action item that the Pride ERG is giving to allies. But if you don't do that, and if you don't even tell allies how to add their pronouns, you're adding barriers into them actually being able to show up for your community. So it's really kind of like an ego pride thing of like, are you gonna just stand firm on like, we're not going to tell them how to do it. They need to do it themselves. Or you're just going to make it easy for them to show up because
Right.
they want to show up. They said, hey, I want to help. Just tell them how to help.
Right. I love that. I love that. So here's my takeaway from that, right? When allies need to know how to show up. So ERGs need to have that, I guess, as a part of their mission, their strategy. Like the door is open to allies. Don't say that your ERG is members only. You can't say that. But when you open the door to allies, whether it's non-Black people or non-Asian people or non-LGBTQ plus people, it actually bridges the gap, right? It bridges the gap between the possible dysfunction in the workplace and or the world and the healing that can take place. We spend more time at work with those people at work, right? We spend more time at work with the people at work than we do with our families. And so when there's an opportunity for allies, advocates to come in and learn, I think the door should be wide open. Come in, sit down over here, don't touch anything. But ask questions, right? Ask questions. It should be a safe place for everyone. And, as we talk about psychological safety, a lot of times, I believe the ERGs, when done right, can absolutely create a space of psychological safety. And it starts in the ERG, but it begins to spread throughout the organization. It starts there, but it doesn't have to stay there.
Yep. I mean, you're breaking down barriers, like you just mentioned, when you have allies as part of the ERG, because now you're getting more comfortable. Like, let's just say, for instance, and I keep using a Black ERG, for instance, because that's the ERG. And yeah.
But I want people listening to this conversation to also understand that you can have an ERG for any type of community in your organization. Any type of people with allergies. You can have an ERG for people who have disabilities, people who have mental health. And we're seeing that so much in the workplace now. Wellness and how do I deal with my mental health or my mental health or my mental illness or my mental health challenges and still work. So to have a safe space in ERG where you can get education, where allies in leadership can learn, this person, they're a great employee, but sometimes they need these accommodations. You can learn that from an ERG. So I don't want people to lose the message that ERGs are just for one type of group. If you collect the data from your workforce, that will tell you what type of ERGs people want to have. So I wanted to just kind of say that.
No, that's a great, and I will add, there can be ERGs for really almost anything with that shared experience, shared pain point. Definitely having the 10 before expanding to the other ones is a pointer that I will add, though, because sometimes companies will start with like a health and fitness one, for instance. It's like your Black employees are really struggling here. Why do they not have a community? But you're talking about health and fitness, and you're talking about, I will add that too, because
no, thank you. Yes.
A lot. Yeah, it's something that I see a lot, and employees see that and they interpret that however they want to interpret that. So
right. And it does send a message, right? It does send a message because Black employees tend to suffer in silence. We suffer in silence. And during the 2020 the summer of 2020 or the I've had my own company for 17 years, but as I read about and heard about all of the things that were happening in the workplace, and people found their voices, it was like I was re-traumatized. It was
Mhm.
like there was a name put to what I had experienced when I was in the workplace,
Mhm.
right? It was like I was re-traumatized. And so I am a huge supporter of ERGs, where people don't have to suffer in silence. They can get support, but the leadership has to also, they also need to be a part of that. And it needs to not just begin and end in the ERG. It needs to expand throughout the workplace
Mhm.
and ultimately change the culture. Maceo, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and this is a great example. And this is the last time I'll use a Black ERG as an example. I'm going to start using others. But just because this is something as an ERG leader that I have seen. I don't know. I could use others, but this is just an example.
No, yeah, yeah.
A while ago, I hosted a block party, like a virtual ERG block party.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I was literally hosting it. And let's even rewind. I've done more than one. But let's even rewind back to like during COVID where everyone was having like happy hours. This, because I was hosting it, I was the person who was like hyping people up, like, hey, I see you, and
Yeah.
I'm not normally that person in work. I'm really normally like an introvert. I'm not that person. And people were like, basically, I didn't even know that you like had this side to your personality. But because
Mm.
I had this space where I could show it, and again, this wasn't just Black employees who were there, everyone was welcome to join. Now, the next time I see that person, I'm that much more likely to show that piece of my personality.
The authenticity, right?
Exactly. And that's so hard to do in other circumstances. It's hard to do,
Mm-hmm.
but within these communities, it's easier to let your guard down this one time. So now you're connecting with other people who you're able to let your guard down. This can spread. And that person can be like, wow, I saw them let their guard down. I'm going to try it now myself. So to your point about changing the organizational culture, especially when it comes to belonging and inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
same thing with allyship. Like if I'm an ally to a community, like let's just say we haven't talked about veterans that much. So like the military
Yeah.
veteran community, where there's a stigma with a lot of people who come from that background around them being triggered easily and all these things. There's a lot of like stereotypes that come with that community. Again, shared pain points, and shared experience.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, if I acknowledge and do best practices when it comes to fighting that stereotype with me as an ally to that community and other people see, they're also just being, and that's what I love about ERGs is
Yeah.
it's so not a political thing and like thing. It's like this is just human ways to respect people when it comes to this allyship thing.
Being kind. It's a way to come
Exactly,
together and learn how to be kind, learn how to follow the golden rule.
exactly. And that's what, and it spreads because once people realize that this is not me attacking what they believe in or who they are, or
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. This is literally just a space to learn more and to learn how to respect people because that's something that you cannot lose by learning more about how to respect people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the more we learn about each other, um, the more we can respect each other, the more we can have understanding and grace for
Hmm.
one another. If I am aware of your experiences and who you are, it's going to help me understand this is why she thinks like this when we're in other meetings, right? That's, I have a frame of reference. And then
Yeah.
you can also have a frame of reference for how I think. And then we can find some common ground on that. So
And this,
I want to go back to allies. And I don't know if this kind of addresses the same thing that we talked about before, but how does the active involvement of allies and advocates within ERGs enhance the overall inclusivity and impact of these groups? You know, are there specific instances where the inclusion of allies and advocates significantly contributed to the success of an ERG? Are there times when you would say no, absolutely no allies at this point. I mean, I don't know. Are there specific instances where, so that's what I really want to know. Are there instances where including allies significantly contribute to the success of an ERG, and had an impact on the group?
Yes, I'm just now realizing I never defined the advocates piece, which at a lot of companies they go by executive sponsors. So like
Talk to us about all of that lingo.
yes. So an executive sponsor of an ERG, that's someone who is senior in the company, who is basically serving as a sponsor, which in many cases that hasn't been defined, but serving as a sponsor to ERGs. And typically there's like one executive sponsor assigned per ERG. The executive doesn't have to be an identifying member of that community.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at DoorDash, our executive sponsor was a white man, and I was a Black ERG leader. But he did make a huge impact. That being said, I will say I'm in the middle of rethinking what executive sponsor is. That's like something that I've really been thinking about recently. So I haven't
Mm-hmm.
fully landed on my answer because I'm realizing, and like many things with the ERG space, and that's why I do the work that I do, a lot of it is just legacy things. So if
Mm.
it's always had an executive sponsor, now that it's considered best practice. And again, it's never really been defined. Many companies do it differently. Executive sponsors are being underutilized. I think that executive sponsorship could be better. I'm still kind of landing on what that means. But in the
Mm-hmm.
meantime, I can speak to what it's done for me,
Mm-hmm.
and what I've seen with two examples. Thing one is an illustration that I use a lot. There's a video on YouTube of this like person who's dancing in the middle of a field. It's at a festival, so you would actually think a lot of people will be dancing. But anyway, they're dancing in the middle of the field. There's people all around them sitting down, looking at them like, what are they doing? And it goes on for like a good like 2 minutes of just like it's not even like a little bit like two-step type of dance. Like it's like all out. This person is fully going at it. Um, Maybe like 2 minutes in, two people walk up and they start dancing too. And they are looking just as awkward, but they're having a great time. Slowly, there's a couple more people who join and start dancing. And by the end of the video, there's hundreds of people dancing. And I love that illustration so much. Because
Oh.
oftentimes the people who are doing ERG work, they're dancing alone. When they first start, when the ERG first launches, it's almost like they're dancing awkwardly where they're posting things in the Slack channel or they're hosting these events and it feels like people aren't really getting it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where granted, sometimes the community already does want, ideally, they'll already want the ERG and there's already some participation. But really, when it gets to growing the ERG, having those people, those first two allies who come in and start dancing, they start getting involved, really actively involved. Or the same thing with the executive sponsor, who is almost like a super influencer in the organization. So if they do it,
Mm-hmm.
other people are going to feel like they have permission to also do it as well. People
Yeah.
don't need permission to dance. They don't need permission to engage in ERGs, but seeing executives do it, seeing people across all different backgrounds do it, that in a sense gives them that permission to participate.
Mm.
So that's one thing. And again, like I said, executive sponsors are really like super influencers in an organization. So they can tell their team, hey, I would love to see y'all at this next event that I'm going to be at. And I can almost assure you, you're going to get more engagement than usual from people who've never attended because the head of IT has just said, I'll see you there, right? So you're going to feel that pressure to attend, even if it's just like out of guilt or whatever it might be. That might be where like you join the event and you end up loving it, and now you're excited to be an ally again, and all these things, or to participate. Because even then, not everyone who's part of a community, like just because you might be a woman, that doesn't make you want to join the women's ERG. So
Mm-hmm.
this might also give you that, again, that permission to say, I'm going to try this thing and you might love it. Um, the second is a little bit more personal in that what executive sponsorship has done for me. Again, I'm trying to figure out how to really scale this for ERG programs, but I know when I was an ERG leader, for me, in the ERG space, I was doing really great. Things were
Mhm.
happening for me. In my regular day job at the company, things were not. Things were not going.
Mm.
And just for context, I was a support employee. It was like barely above minimum wage. Like I was at the bottom of the the organizational structure. And I could not break through for so many reasons.
Wow.
But that being said, my executive sponsor actually advocated for me to get a role, my first salaried role on the people team. And he made it happen in less than a month. And it was
Wow.
just incredible. But because they had seen what I'd done and what I was capable of and how I had like this like excited project manager kind of piece to me, they were
Hmm.
actually like they really did the work. They texted me on my phone. So for me, a support employee to have like a huge executive to text me and be like, look, how do we get you into a better position? And then to have other executives be like, hey, they reached out and they told me that like you're amazing. Is this going to be a fit on my team? Like I probably have like 4 executives' phone numbers, and sometimes they still reach out every now and then just to check in. And it's like an executive can be so like for me, coming from like low income background, never ever, no one in my family's had a salary before. Like that was my first time having equity. This was completely new. So the
Wow.
that like that it may feel so small to him, like what he did, but for it to really impact my entire life, I've been able to do so many cool things since I got into that space. And make, when you get access to more money, now you can give back in ways that you never thought. Not to mention that doing that eventually landed me into my first 6-figure role, which eventually landed me into what I'm doing now.
I
So
mean, the movement, right?
the
He's
move.
he sparked the movement.
Truly. And executives, I've seen them do this at different companies where
Yeah.
they can have that kind of impact, or even if it's not on that personal level, there's still
Hmm.
the piece of, yes, amplifying the ERG, or maybe if ERG leaders are like me and they come from this support background, they don't really know how to do the whole corporate thing. Maybe they're going to be the ones to help connect them and to help, review a document and give them some pointers and some feedback. So there's so many things that they can do. I do think that they're under leveraged, and maybe it's time to kind of rethink that role, though.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Tell us, we've kind of danced around it a little bit. Tell us about the ERG movement.
So the ERG movement has been a long time coming. Now, granted,
Mm.
I launched it at the beginning of this year, but with that, it was more so just like a learning platform. So lots of blog posts, templates, just things. Actually, let me rewind to even before I launched it. So after I became an ERG program manager, again, I was looking for resources everywhere, couldn't find
Hmm.
any good ones. So then I was like, let me start talking to people who are ERG program managers. And in doing that, now I had been an ERG program manager for maybe like 2 months, but I had in that time, I was gearing up to be done with flipping the ERG program and completely getting
Okay.
in in order in one quarter with data, with processes and all these things. So when I talked to people, they were like, "How did you do that? What are you?" And I would tell them like based on like I said, the entrepreneurial background, the interest in business development, and how I applied this, and I did probably really over 300 calls last year with people, whether they're ERG leaders, program managers, head of diversity people, just because I wanted to help. At first, start off, I wanted to get help, but then I realized like, oh, I have something. So now I just want to help. And so with the ERG movement, I just wanted to scale that effort because I know that sustainably I cannot do that many calls where I'm doing like 3 a day and like I'm just helping people. I want to do that, but I'm one person. My
Yeah.
goal is through the ERG movement to really scale what I'm doing, and that I want to make ERG leadership as easy as possible while still being incredibly impactful. So
Wow.
yeah, that's kind of like the story behind the ERG movement.
Wow. Well, we're gonna tell people at the end how they can become a part of the ERG movement. So what do you want leaders to take away from this discussion today? We've talked a lot about a lot of things. We've done some education. Um, what do you want leaders to take away from this conversation?
I want leaders to take away. I think the biggest piece is that ERGs, it's really it's not a thing of like, oh, is this something that I believe in? Because again, the diversity space can be incredibly political. I think that this transcends that by far. And like, this is really a human thing. I've seen people from all backgrounds benefit from joining an ERG, and just becoming a better person. So truly for companies who don't have ERGs, I encourage you, learn about them, what they are. It doesn't have to be it it can be done well and actually have an incredible impact. Even if you might feel like we don't need an ERG, you'd be in shock at what employees feel like they need and the community that they meet. So yeah. And if you do have a ERG at your company, you just haven't like pulled the trigger yet on like engaging,
Right.
go dance, go join the
Go start the dance, right?
Mhm.
So what are you reading? Last question. What are you reading that we should be reading?
Yes. So two books that I have here. I think the first one is just this is kind of what got me into, and my thing is blurred out. But this is actually what got me into the thought of like ERGs and how they can play a part in the culture. It's called No Rules. And this is kind of like the story of like Netflix and like how they run their company. And it's so different than how a lot of people run their company. I just, again, because I'm into like business development, I'm into doing things different to get a different result. I know
Yes.
it's like problematic for a lot of people when they read the book, because they have some interesting tactics, but this is what got me into it.
So
And
tell us the name of it.
it's called No Rules Rules, by Aaron Myers and Reed Hastings. So
Okay.
it's co-authored. Highly recommend. If you're in the ERG space, you should really understand the concept of a good culture.
Yes.
Less like so many people over-index on the D&I piece of it when it's like there's really a piece to the culture and how they play a part in it. So this is good context, but like you just mentioned around like personal development and professional development being hand in hand. One book that's really impacted me on a personal and professional development aspect is called 12 and a Half, by Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm a big fan of huge fan. And this just really made a difference with me in terms of like, it's talking about emotional intelligence, and essentially 12 and a half, it's breaking down 12 aspects of emotional intelligence and technically an additional half there. And just really understanding how that shows up within you. What are your strengths? What are your pain points when it comes to emotional intelligence? It makes a huge difference. So yeah, I recommend that too.
It really does. It really does. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We've been chatting with Maceo Owens, aka the ERG Homegirl, founder, CEO, and ERG Program Developer for the ERG Movement. Visit the show notes page to see how to connect with Maceo and join the ERG Movement. Be sure to grab a copy of Results Driven Organizations, The 4 Keys to a High Performance Workplace. You can use the link in the show notes page and grab our special gift to you for being a valuable listener. Until next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Be sure to review the show notes for the resources mentioned, and don't forget to grab your free gift available at freegiftfromtanya.com. Until next time.